Okay.
Okay, Kim. Should
Okay.
be right.
Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted.
All right, great. All right, well, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us again this morning. It's fun to do these, and especially if we are finding that it's sort of great. It's really great for people who aren't happen to be here just at this moment. So that's really fun. So today we're going to do Andy's Way, Salt Marsh, and environs, and I'm going to take you on an Andy's Way walk in a direction that you may not have ever done or have done rarely. So this is this is the beauty shot, and that's it for that. Moving on. Here's our map of where we're going to go, and we're going to start. I parked at the Andy's Way parking lot, which is about where my pointer is. And then we're going out to Cornneck Road. And this is where the Andy's Way sign is. And then we're going to go along Cornneck Road. And then we come into this road that is the right of way to this pretty large conservation area that doesn't have a lot of access. But this part of the trip is a dirt road. Most of this land over here is U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And then the Block Island Conservancy owns land down here. And then, of course, a lot of Andy's Way is the town of New Shoreham. And, you know, recognize this as a lot of conservation area in the salt marsh area. And oops, I have a very sensitive screen. And that the inlay map shows you roughly where on Block Island you are. We're in the northern part of the island this week. The numbers correspond generally to photos that will be coming along. So if you want to go back, you can kind of say, well, where was that exactly? And then we'll loop through, we'll come into the back part of the marsh and then walk along the edge, spend quite a bit of time in the flat areas and observing things, and then come back along the edge here and back to the bike or the car or whatever you left out in order to get here. So that's our loop in a general way, and off we go. So our first stop is at the corner of Andy's Way Road and Cornneck Road, and people have often asked me where it is. The Cornneck Road takes a very sharp, let's see, that would be a right-hand turn if you're going north. And off to the left is this straight shot dirt road with a parking area down here, which is generally referred to as Andy's Way. And it does have a sign that says Andy's Way. And believe it or not, here we are in whizzing moped alley, and yet there's plenty to see along the side of Cornneck Road. There's you don't have to go very far before you come across apples, which are doing quite well this year. There's an apple tree tucked into the side of the road there. And this is all on the left-hand side or the west side of Cornneck Road as we walk. It was too dangerous to try to cross the street the day I was doing this. So I stayed on one side of the road. So apples are coming on pretty well. If we get a little moisture so that they keep growing, that would be foretell well for a good apple season. And then low on the side of the road is this wonderful plant called bouncing bet. It's also known as soapwort. If you take the plant, parts of the plant, and water and kind of scrub your hands together, it will lather up. So that's where it gets that name of soapwort. And so bouncing bet, that's just coming into bloom. This is a nice, I've seen a few around that are on the, you usually see them on the sides of the roads around the island, and they can look a little scraggly once the individual blossoms pass, but they're really just peaking now. So I got a nice one. Another wonderful, whoops, wrong way, there we go. Another wonderful sort of wetland bush that's in bloom around the island right now, and these really like standing water, and there just happens to be a little pond right in the corner of this area. And this is a plant it's a shrub called buttonbush, and I just really love this plant, so I took many pictures. And their flowers are just, they're like little satellites, and they're just so different looking and so beautiful. And the bees really love them. So It's a wonderful shrub that you don't necessarily notice. And to be honest, this is an area I spend a fair amount of time in, this little corner of Corn Neck Road, and I have never noticed the buttonbush in this swamp before. So it just goes to show you one of my premises is that if you walk, you take time to see the whole world, not just the passing world. So you never know when you're walking along what you might find that you didn't know was there. So buttonbush, keep an eye out for it. It's in full bloom around the island right now. Another great spot to look for this is up near the bluff end of Pilot Hill Road. The swamp there is just on both sides of the road is full of this buttonbush. I've been talking as we go along through many of these things are sort of evolving. The summer is moving on. I've had lots of pictures of common milkweed, and this was the first plant that I found, again, along the side of the road on Corn Neck, of milkweed pods starting to come through. And it's the little flowers die away and they droop off, and at the base of each little flower is the potential of a milkweed pod. So here's a little one just coming on, a little bit bigger one, and one sort of in the middle. So again, keep your eye out, things are changing, and it's only July. Now, when you get to a road, this is not marked for conservation, but it does have a very distinctive signpost with a dragonfly on it, which is sort of appropriate because there are a lot of dragonflies out right now. This road used to have a sign on it that said Star, S-T-A-R-R. This is the road that went to Al Starr's house, and Andy's, his father, the father of Andy Starr, after whom Andy's Way is named. And then for a while it said Star and Kite, his daughter's married name. And now this property has been sold, and it has a new sign, and it's got a great butterfly on it. Do not be dissuaded. This is the right of way to the conservation area. And it's actually, I've walked this road quite a bit. It's very stony. They put in a lot of crushed stone. So the walking is pretty easy for a while. But you go straight down the road, and there's a house right here, and then the road takes a turn. And there it is. And then once it takes a turn, you're looking straight down. And it proceeds on like this for a while. Again, no real huge scenic values except for what you see along the way, which of course are more plants. The other thing, besides the common milkweed that I've been pointing out, is blackberries, and they're in various stages. I'm surprised to see blackberries still in bloom. This is a blossoming, cane of blackberry that I took on last Thursday. So amazing that still buds and blossoms. And on the very same plant, they're starting to redden up. And we've been seeing green blackberries, and now we're seeing some red ones. So the season is coming, and off we go. So you go down this road, you see lots of, you have to kind of look into the sides, and you think you're looking at all green brush and bullbriar and different things. But if you look closely enough, you start to find some interesting wildflowers that especially start coming out in midsummer. On the left is curled dock. It's in the buckwheat family, and I've been asked many times what this plant is and whether or not those are the dead leaves. That's actually the flower, that brown, they're the individual flowers. And it has a really interesting sort of structure and texture. So, not all flowers are beautiful orchids. And actually, I kind of really like that. I've got to really like the curled dock. And a piece of this in a flower arrangement really adds some nice dimension to a wildflower bouquet. And very near that, on the side of the road, was this blue vervain. And this is a plant like the common mullein, where there's a shaft, a spear of flowers, but the individual flowers as it goes up the stem. So it starts pretty much, I believe, from the bottom up, just like the mullein. But this is a great plant that you see. They usually say in waste places, but I don't know if the side of the road would constitute a waste place. But beautiful form again. Eventually you get to the end of the gravel road, and should have taken a picture of what this view is to the left or the right. The road ends, and what used to be a small cottage on the left, which you'll have to imagine as I describe it, so it would be off to the left of this view, is now a very large house, and where the small cottage was looks like the garage, the two-door garage. And then if you look to the right of this view, as if it was the other side of the road, is another very large new building. I believe it's all one property now, and the Little Star Cottage is now yet to be lived in. It's still under construction, but a very large house and compound. People will enjoy it. They're in a great spot. But at this point, and actually I should have taken a wider photo, I'm sorry I didn't. Off to the left here is a very large, one of those electric power boxes. So it sort of marks the entry to the pathway. This is mowed path by the Black Island Conservancy, and I like it that they keep it kind of rough. You know, it's not mowed to within an inch of its life, and the grass is there, but it is very passable. And there are a few, you know, blackberries that are arcing out to grab your sleeve, but never mind, just keep going. Along the way, you get to some open spot, and this is a plant that I never knew of until last year. Now I think I've seen it on the last 3 of our walks. It's called Dogbane. It's in the milkweed family. You can sort of see some of this resemblance in the individual blossoms over here. It's also called Indian hemp. The one of the distinctive features of is these stems are very reddish looking, and they're very sinewy. So they were used by early Native Americans for cordage, for wrapping baskets and weaving and things like that. So that is the origin of one of the common names, Indian hemp, which I think is quite a lot more beautiful than dogbane. But I think dogbane refers to the fact that if your dog chewed on it, it would make him sick. Again, it is a milkweed, and it does have some toxic properties to its milky juices. And on we go. If you keep going down this path, you will come about midway between the edge of the marsh and the beginning of the path. There is a marker that was put in place several years ago by the Historical Society, and it says Manissean village site 500 BC. And this was roughly the site of a very large archaeological dig that happened. Oh boy, I would say, I think everything is 10 years ago, but probably it was 20 years ago. And it was done with Kevin McBride. No, not Kevin McBride. Oh geez, I'll have to come back to it. My brain has just gone quiet. But anyways, a large archaeological dig. He's the state archaeologist in Connecticut, and he works at the Mashantucket Pequots.
Kim, it is Kevin McBride.
It is. Thank you. Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
Thank you, Kevin McBride. A few years ago, I was giving this walk, and he just happened to be at the site of the new house, doing an archaeological survey before they could start the construction. And we had the good fortune of having him join us for the walk and going down to the site and talking to us about the things that he found there. So that was really great. But it's a very old site. It's considered to be the oldest site for New England Native Americans. And it's been radio dated, as I indicated there, that this location is 500 BC, that there are Native Americans occupying Block Island. And his work indicates that it was probably about a 3-year-old village site, and that was typical of the time when Native Americans would go set up a site, and then when the resources of the area were depleted enough and enough varmint, fleas and rats came in, then you would move on. So so this was a pretty amazing thing, and don't go digging here. Now you continue on the path. That, as I said, that marker is about halfway down the grassy path. It gets more and more wet as you go along, and you see I found a stalk of this mint, and I have been trying to figure out which mint that is, and I have not figured it out. I have to go back and look at it. At first I thought it was a long stalk of flowers, but then I realized that these flowers are in whorls. In other words, the flowers are whirling around the stem in a place, and then there's another whirl, and then another whirl. And the individual flowers, which I think I can do that, are really amazingly beautiful. They're lipped. In other words, they have a lower a part of the blossom that is bigger than the others, and then this pink of the pistils and the stamens mostly coming out. Thing about mint is that they have square stems, and you can't really tell it from the photo, but instead of being a round cylinder, it's an edged or square stemmed plant. So it's quite beautiful, even if I'm not exactly sure the name. And then of course, the swamp milkweed is all along there as well. And there's quite a variation in colors. I have to admit that this blossom of swamp milkweed, I took at a different part of the island the same day, and it's a little bit more purple. And the swamp milkweed that's in sight there is much pinker. But again, a beautiful and plant in the milkweed family, and they are considered an obligate wetland plant, although I have seen them in very dry areas. But usually the ground is fairly moist if you're seeing swamp milkweed. And finally, you get to the end of this path, and there's a little path that goes through the Phragmites and the reeds, which you're seeing here on the left. And you go through that path, and you start coming out the other side, and suddenly you are on the edge of the salt marsh. You've left the grassy path and come out, and it's all Spartina and various marsh plants and mud and low water and what have you. And because we are in sort of the back corner of Andy's Way Marsh, you're looking at a perspective that you usually don't see. And this little headland is what's referred to as Skipper's Island. And we'll get a better vantage point that's more familiar a little bit later in the presentation, but that's what that is. That's Skipper's Island. And at high tide, the water comes up over this area and goes around and actually connects from the other side, especially at super high tides. And that's what makes it, quote, an island. But there are these great, sort of this river of water here, which was, makes it, contributes all to the marsh-like setting of muck and whatnot. Now, at this point, we're gonna turn, let's see, south and go along the edge. So we've just come out of the path, and we're about to go along this edge until we can find a way to get over to the sandy marsh edge. But it's muddy along the way, and you have to watch your step. And there is one area where it seems like no matter when I do this walk, I get into the mud a little bit more than I hope to. So I suggest taking a stick with you to help with your balance. I will say that this is the first time I didn't actually fall in. So I kept myself upright, even if my feet got covered in muck. But there's only one spot, and then you can regain solid ground. So that's pretty good. As you go along, you see lots of things. This on the left is a horseshoe crab molt. Horseshoe crab, as you probably all know, is well, it's not a crab for starters, but it is an exoskeleton. It has to molt, like most crabs and lobsters, it has to molt its outer hard skeleton as it grows. So the molt of horseshoe crabs are left behind in the thousands, and you often find them. Usually you find them a little bit further, closer to the water. In this case, it was up in the grass. So it must have floated up at high tide, and then when the tide receded, it just settled down into this grassy area. And as I kept going along the edge, you start getting into, at the point that I took the second picture, I had crossed over to the mud and was walking around along the easternmost edge of the mud flats. And somebody has anchored a zodiac back there, which is not to my liking. It's the first time I've ever had to deal with a non-natural piece of man-made machinery. But I had to take the photo because even though it's not great, and you'll find I am not an avian artist when it comes to photography. This is a greater Yellowlegs. You can sort of make out that it has yellow legs. And this over here is a Willet. And these are both shoreline birds nesting. The greater Yellowlegs, I don't believe nests on Black Island, but the Willet definitely does. And its legs are sort of blue-gray, and it's often hard to distinguish them. But if you get a good chance to look at their legs, if they're yellow, it's a greater Yellowlegs, not a Willet. And so we've made our way sort of more the traditional part of the mud flats. I always talk about the stream, and this stream changes every year. It seems to be in a new place depending on the winds and how the sand has shifted and filled in. And it's quite a meandering, wide stream this year. And it gets out into the Great Salt Pond proper out here, but it kind of winds around. It comes like this, and then it actually curls back more towards where I've just walked from. But at low tide, which this is, of course, it's only about ankle deep. It was enough to wash off my sneakers. So, but this year, or this week, I should say, I started noticing a lot of these lion's manes jellyfish plopped up all along the edge. So the jellyfish have come. Usually it's later in the summer that the jellies, sometimes they're just moon jellies, which I don't worry so much about, but the lion's manes do have stingers. When this animal is suspended in the water, the stingers hang down and help it catch its food, but you should not be touching these with your bare hands. So keep an eye out. Stepping on them would be probably a problem. I had to instruct somebody that maybe they shouldn't let their dog sniff around it. That would be a sharp pang on the nose. So. But then, of course, we could not go to Andy's Way with Kim without looking at a few birds. Again, not the greatest, but unfortunately, the photo on the left is a little blurry, but it's really the best one I could get of the snowy egret. And the two predominant egrets, white egrets that we have down at Andy's Way or see anywhere around the island are the snowy egret, and then on the right, the great egret. The snowies are a little smaller, although that is sometimes hard to tell, but their manner of fishing is is very different from each other. The snowy egrets will sort of run and poke and whirl around and chase down their food. They often use their feet to sort of joggle the substrate to get fish to come by. And so the one on the left, the snowy egret with the black bill, and unfortunately you cannot see its yellow feet in this photo, acts differently than the great egret, which is on the other side, which has the yellow beak and all black legs and feet. And I was just lucky that I got this photo just as this bird was about to take flight. So this is just pure luck. I like that I can sort of see the water dripping off of its feathers right here. So great egret here, snowy egret there. What do we have? Oh yeah, then we have cormorants. They were swimming in the back part of the stream. They were more in the area where I came out, but I couldn't see this area. There's an area where you look back. It's like looking into a long tongue or a fjord, if you will, a fjord if it can be 6 inches deep. And you look into that back pool and you often see cormorants or ducks, geese, different things back there hunting. So there's a little bit of depth back there. So it's a little more than 6 inches. So I think I can call it a fjord compared to the rest of the flats. Another great bird that's just showing up this summer, it's been around for, I guess, about 10 days now, is the semi-palmated plover. This is by far the most common plover that you'll see on Andy's Way. It's very distinctive with its black neck band right there. Not to be confused with the piping plover, which we only see very rarely. Usually during migration, we might be lucky enough to see a piping plover, but they have they're much more white, and they have a double band. So the semi-palmated plover. I think I need to take a little sip here. Thank you. Of course, lots of gulls down there. This is 2 young great black-backed gulls begging for food from the parent on the left. I can tell that those young are great black-backs because they're begging food from an obvious adult great black-back gull. The young of the herring gull and the great black-back are very hard to distinguish unless, because they look very similar to sort of that mottled brown color. They're about the same size, and unless you can tell who's feeding who, it would be hard to distinguish the species of this year's young. But boy, you take a look at those 2 young, it's to the right. Hey, what a beautiful bird. I mean, you usually look at a gull and say, wow, that is its feather and plumage. Its feathering is usually very pure and very sleek and well put together, and it doesn't ever really look too ruffled. Well, the same is true of these young, even though the patterning is completely different. It's actually stunning once you look at it closely enough. So very handsome young birds. So we've moved a little bit out of those sort of the open flats, which would be over here, and going back. And just standing at the edge, just to point out couldn't do a walk anywhere on Block Island without talking a little geology. Again, this is another view of Skipper's Island, and it's a little hummock of land. It's got some actual land shrubs and shrublands, things like bayberry and shad along the edge. And I should have pointed it out in one of the earlier photos. This whole edge also has a plant called high tide bush, which will start blooming little white feathery blossoms in September. It's also known as groundsel. But this is Skipper's Island, a little island in itself at high tide. And if you look a little bit more to the west this way, you will see this, which is, most people know it as Bean Point, but its old Block Island name is Hippocampus, and it is what's called a drumlin, a geologic feature known as a drumlin, which is a sort of an oval-shaped hunk of land, sandy land, glacial debris. And what it is was an extra large piece of the glacier when it was here about 20,000 years ago. Got separated, fell off. It was really big, and it melted. It had so much debris in it that where it melted, all the debris fell out into one pile of rubble. And there are several of these drumlins. It kind of gives a lot of Block Island's undulating landmass. That's where we get that undulating landmass feature from, the fact that there are many hunks of glacier that dropped off and then melted, and the debris stayed in one spot, and those were drumlins. Indian Head Neck, where the Sullivan House is a drumlin, and of course Hippocampus here. Hippocampus got its name from a sea camp in the 50s. 50s? Double checking myself, maybe 30s, I think 30s. Boys sea camp, they named it Hippocampus. And there used to be a lot of, you would often find seahorses in this area because of the drawing another blank, the underwater vascular plant that'll come to me later. Anyway, the seahorses love that area for protection, and you'll see their tails, if you're lucky and underwater, see their tails curled around the stems of those where they can kind of tether themselves. Anyway, the genus name of the seahorse is Hippocampus, and that is how that particular name got adopted by the Sea Camp years and years ago. So in a nod to Block Island history, I try to always incorporate calling Hippocampus, which is what everybody called it until about the 1970s when the beans became more prevalently known out there, the bean family. So it is known by many as Bean Point. But before that, it was a hippocampus, and before that, it was simply a drumlin. As we go along, lots of seaweeds of different types. In this case, we have two different types of filamentous green algae. These up here, they're very fine thread-like filaments. And on this one, you can almost see the filaments are a little bit wider and flatter. They're actually hollow tubes, but because it's on land and dried out, the tube has collapsed. Think of a collapsed straw. So that's a green algae. Like the algae, like moss and lichens that I've talked about in other weeks, are a big group, and sometimes it's enough just to know that it's a green algae or seaweed, a green seaweed. We have other types of green seaweed that I am better at naming. This is sea lettuce. And again, if I look up, you see that here, the blades are very flattened, like lettuce. And so that's another type of green algae.
Hey, Kim, I'm sorry. Yep. I'm sorry. There's a little bit of a time delay on the changing. I'm just wondering when you were talking about it. Yeah. So you're.
Should I go back?
I think you're okay now. I think you can see the sea lettuce. So yeah.
Yep. Good. That was probably because I was zooming in and out. The bottom one here is codium, sometimes known as dead man's fingers. It will propagate by just taking a little piece of this, and it will grow a whole new plant from it. It's also been known as oyster thief because it is a very buoyant seaweed. All seaweeds have what's called a holdfast, where the plant attaches through a sort of a rooting-like structure where it attaches to something solid like a rock or a shell or something like that, or an oyster. And if the oyster should come loose, there may be enough buoyant mass to carry the oyster away, and thus the old term of oyster thief. And then this is a brown algae. Oops, let's see if I can do that. There we go. Commonly known as rockweed. And in this case, you can see its holdfast is attached to a rock. And then it's attached through a little stem-like thing called the holdfast. Again, these are very buoyant. The idea is that when they're submerged in the water, there's some buoyancy so that the plant is sort of, instead of being held down, drop down from above, it's floating up from its solid surface, so the water can circulate around it, and it can feed, it can be close enough to the surface to photosynthesize. And of course, a lot of seaweeds are used for, for fertilizer. Old island tradition of putting seaweed on your gardens as a fertilizer. Some red algae known as Irish moss, which I did not find this particular day, is known for its making pudding, something called blancmange. And if you go to a Black Island cookbook, you'll find that. And it's just part of the nature of the place. On Andy's Way, you usually find it dried up in beautiful, beautiful forms, fan-like forms on the sand as the tide has gone out. This is, if you look closely, if you know what you're looking at, is the trail of a horseshoe crab. a baby living horseshoe crab. And they're under the surface. This is it. It's right here, but it's under the sand. And you can just tell by its shape. I happened to watch this one for a while, and you could just slowly see it inching forward underneath the sand. And it will leave behind its path, its trail. So that's a baby horseshoe crab trail. And there is the baby horseshoe crab that I dug up just for a moment. Unlike the molt, which is the dried out, just the shell, this is a live baby horseshoe crab. It's a little bit bigger than a quarter, maybe a $50. And it's about 5 years old at this size. It's much older than you would think. So they will molt several times, and when they're young, they'll molt several times each year until they start getting to be a little bit bigger. Other things that you might find along Andy's Way is snails, and what I call the stream, the part of the mud flats where there's a stream of water that is constantly flowing, either draining the back part of the marsh or filling in with as the tide comes in. Along that edge, you see right now lots of these different snails, and I should have tried to key these out to species, but I did not. You could, they also, if you watch them for a while, you can see them moving on their big foot and their little antennae kind of going around sensing whatever is in the water. And they're kind of fun to watch, and there are a lot of them. Next to it is a shell of a ribbed mussel, and a ribbed mussel is also known as a mud mussel. It's different than the blue mussels that you get off of rocks. They tend to, you find a lot of these in Andy's Way in the bank, in the muddy bank, and that's where they live. I didn't know until a few years ago that people actually ate ribbed mussels. But there's a local island couple, summer couple that I see quite often down there, and they're the ones who say, oh yeah, they're delicious. So, I haven't tried them myself, but I love mussels. I think I'll stick with the blue mussels. Lots of plants, especially adapted plant along the beach, right at the high tide or nearly high tide level. On the right is slender glasswort. Sometimes people call it pickleweed. It tastes very sour and salty, but people do eat it. I don't recommend eating anything. Don't listen to me at all. Just, I know that people have eaten it. We do not recommend eating anything unless you know what you're doing. But it's Salicornia, and the big mass of it can be aided by salt water. It can be exposed at low tide. And the thing about, and this one next to it is sea rocket. And these plants, both of these plants are the plant structure itself is very dense. It's like a succulent. It holds moisture very efficiently in the flesh of the plant. And that's one of the reasons it can be so well adapted to the sandy, no fresh water substrate. It can take whatever it can get in the way of fresh water to support it and store it in its body and keep it in its flesh and keep it from desiccating. But again, these are plants that you see right at the edge of where high water will just be touching it, and then its salt water is completely exposed. Highly adapted, specialized sand plants. And then another one of those is Spartina. There are several types of Spartina. This, again, very well adapted. This particular Spartina is if you've been to Andy's Way, you know that if you come down, the boats are over here, so the path is about where my pointer is, and you would come this way. There's this little island of Spartina grass, and at high tide, it's completely inundated with salt water. And again, it can be very mesmerizing if there's a little bit of a action to the water, to see a wave come through and sort of wave through the Spartina and then go back out and then wave through. So it's can be very Zen-like activity to watch the waves sort of pulsing through the Spartina grass. Another specialized plant, not inundated by water, but can survive in sand and dune-like systems, is the Seaside Goldenrod. Again, it has very leathery leaves, which help it to maintain its moisture. Let's see if I can make this one explode. There we go. You can see its leaves are not the fine filamentous leaves that you see in a lot of the goldenrods. It's very thick, leathery leaves, helps it survive. You see these only really in a very sandy, almost no nutrient, very nutrient poor soils right at the dune level. And all these plants help hold the sand and the substrate, the soil, in place so that erosion doesn't occur. So those are our specialized plants anymore. And then this is my shellfish sampler, not something you would get at the Oyster House. But this is, I've just, in one quick trip around Andy's Way, I think I pretty much found almost all of the shells that you might find down there. And I'll quickly go through them. This large one is not a big quahog, it's a sea clam. And if you get a good one that's big and not too old, so it's not brittle, it becomes the perfect clam digging implement. These two shells, you know, it's a little bit different, more narrow and oval-like. This is a soft shell clam, not to be confused with the quahog, which is this shell, these two shells over here. And of course, you're probably all familiar with the purple in the quahog shell, which is the origin of wampum. And my favorite story is that the genus species name for the quahog is Mercenaria mercenaria, and it refers to, it was named by Linnaeus, and it refers to the fact that this animal and wampum was currency. And so there's a connection between the Native American use of the quahog shell and creating currency to the naming of binomial nomenclature started by Linnaeus at exactly the same time that Europeans were first coming to the Americas. So, this up here is a moon snail. Usually don't see a live one, but sometimes you do. But they're throughout the area, and unfortunately they also like quahogs, and they will use their radula, which is sort of a tongue-like stiff boring or drilling apparatus, to drill a hole in the quahog shell, and then it will insert the moon snail will insert its stomach into the quahog and digest the quahog inside its own shell. Gruesome stuff. But if you ever find a quahog with a little tiny round, you know, maybe millimeter size hole, perfectly, it's because the moon snail got to it first. Another type of snail, the slipper snail, also a boat snail. I should have turned one of these upside down so you could see what it looks like underneath, but lots of slipper snails on the all around the Great Salt Pond, and especially Andy's Way. Over here, I think behind what I think is a photo is the rib mussel, and here are two shells, two halves of the blue mussel, and black on the outside and beautiful blue on the inside, much shinier, different kind of mussel. And this mussel, of course, usually attaches to rocks and solid structures like dock pilings. Next to it is a razor clam, and we usually more likely to find a good size live razor clam if you go across the harbor to Cormorant Cove, but also out by Skipper's Island and the beach headed towards Hippocampus. But this little razor clam shell washed up. Scallop shell, very distinctive shape. This is not the greatest photo, but it is an oyster shell. And this are two halves of a jingle shell, and it has a very sort of opalescent, shiny interior side. So it shows a little bit, forms a little bit different than some of the other, the jingle shell clam, I guess it is. Whoops, still one more. And if I was on Sesame Street, I would say one of these things is not like the other. This, of course, is the horseshoe crab molt, not a shellfish at all, but something that you are likely to find if you are beachcombing at Andy's Way. And with that, we'll start talking about things that you might see around the island this week in late July. This photo on the left is of a milkweed tussock moth caterpillar. This was sent to me, somebody via Charlotte. It was a circuitous route, but I got the information. Somebody was wondering, what is this fuzzy caterpillar that is covering the milkweed? Well, it's a milkweed tussock moth caterpillar. And in some areas, they can really cover the plant and sort of eat a whole milkweed plant in a day. But there are a lot of milkweed and not, although you'll find a lot of milkweed tussock moth caterpillars in one area, they're not so many that they're overtaking all the milkweed on the island. The other thing we're seeing a lot of right now is the common wood nymph. And this is a privet bush. And when I stopped to look at the privet bush, it like had all these fluttering things around it. I couldn't believe there were so many butterflies around it. And I was just lucky enough to get a halfway decent photo of the common wood nymph, missing its face and its antennae, but the diagnostic features of how to identify it are very strong. So common wood nymph are everywhere right now, especially look around your privets. There are whales on Block Island. This is a humpback whale that washed up right below Dickens Point. And it's about 30 feet long. I did not give the photo credit here, which I should have. It's here, but it's layered under, so I don't see it in this view. But Carolyn Rosenzweig took this photo for me from above. We had a humpback a few years ago wash up on the east side of Block Island. And what happens is they decay and rot from the inside out, so that eventually it's just a big bag of skin with its bones rattling around inside, and all the connective tissue will eventually be rotted and eaten out by various things. But you're already seeing certain bones that are coming out of it. This particular animal was tagged by NOAA off of Montauk. It was tagged as a dead whale. Nobody wants a dead whale on their shores, so they tagged it to see where it was going and hoped that it wouldn't land at Montauk. And it didn't make it very far. It landed on Block Island. And through the heroic efforts of, I think, Deaver Best and Tig O'Neill, TNC Marine team actually retrieved the tag that was on this by NOAA, so they could tag, presumably, another dead whale somewhere being left to float on somebody else's shores. But at least it's at Dickens Point, which is maybe unfortunate for the people who live there. On an onshore breeze, it's likely to smell a little bit, but at least it's not on the East Beach this year. Oh, there's the, let's see, I guess I did it backwards. There we go. Other things that are coming in late July, big and little. One is, first of all, I have this photo is not mine. It's from Mass Audubon, but it's a hummingbird moth, which is a little tiny moth that looks like a hummingbird. And the reason it's here is because I was talking to Dory Napoleon, and she had one in her garden this week, and she had a great little video of it. And the hummingbird moth hovers and is active in the daytime like a hummingbird. And you would often easily mistake the hovering of a hummingbird moth to be a hummingbird. It's really in the clear wing moth category, and you can notice its wing is actually clear. You can see right through this. It's just veined. So there's a whole group of moths called the clear wings, and the hummingbird moth is one of them. And then Comet neowise has been in view in our night sky. It's going to be harder to see over the next week to 10 days because the moon is getting full and it's pretty low. It's underneath the Big Dipper, and as the night goes on, the Big Dipper tends to set and get lower, which means the view of the comet also is moving in the same direction, is also getting lower. I have seen it this week. It wasn't quite this clear, but it was very obvious that it was the comet Neowise. And so I would say keep a lookout for it, even if not, as soon as the full moon passes, at least we'll have some early night that once the full moon passes, then it doesn't start rising until later and later. So if you get out there around 9 o'clock, 9:30, after the full moon passes, you'll have a chance of a good dark sky where you could see comet Neowise. It's getting more and more difficult. Although if it was clear, you'd probably be able to see it tonight around 9:30, 9:45, 10 o'clock. And they're coming still. Also on that path, we had not only red blackberries, but a few red blackberries going towards burgundy, going towards black. And these were the first 2 blackberries eaten by me this year. One was a little tart, one was nice and sweet, and together they were perfect. And there's your bird list, my mini bird list for this week's adventure at Andy's Way. And with that, I guess I will happily take questions and comments.
Thanks, Kim. I think I've just unmuted everybody. If anyone wants to chime in with a comment or question. Kim, I had one quick question.
Sure.
Early on, that plant when you're along the road, it was called Soapwort. Is that in the milkweed family? Because you said it was.
It's not. Let's see if I can get back to it. It's in the. It was called Bouncing Bet, and it's in the. Let me look that up right now. It's not a milkweed. I think it's what's called a pink. But
Okay.
while somebody else is asking a question, I'll look it up right now. Feel free to go ahead and ask another question.
I'm going to talk to Marlena about this because, as I mentioned before, she's going over with Freya tomorrow. At one point, you said butterfly, at one point you said dragonfly to turn off corn neck.
Right. Let's see.
Where it used to say star.
It used to say star, and now it looks exactly like the picture I just went to. And it's a dragon.
Maybe it's behind your face.
Oh, maybe it's behind my face.
I can't see any. Yeah.
Yes, if you move my, it's on the image I've just put. You can see it now?
I see Deandra. Well, it's that sign, I guess, that green and blue and white thing that says 688.
Yeah, so right next to that, there's a post, and it has the number vertically 687, and it has a dragonfly on the top of the post as an ornament.
I'm sorry, all your faces are over the sign. Thank you.
I think you can cover those. I think you can delete the faces.
Yeah, but I couldn't figure it out.
Okay. I think you can move. Well, you can go back, maybe.
This is the first. When it's, I'll tell you this though, all the others I've watched afterwards, and the faces are always there.
Uh-huh. Oh, okay. So you won't. So if you go to the panel that has the faces and hover over the top of that panel, you should see some icons.
Yeah.
One looks like a grid.
Yeah.
If you click on the furthest one out, it might only show you one picture.
Hide thumbnail video. Ah, you're gone.
Okay. And can you see the picture now, the photo?
Yes. Oh, yes. And now I can look clearly and not always be hiding my own ugly face.
There you
Oh, it's
go.
lovely. It's a dragonfly.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. And where am I now? In that little thing, I forgot what page I was going to.
Also, Kim, do you think they will put up some kind of plaque memorializing Andy?
Not there. No, I don't think so.
Not there, but at Andy's Way.
Oh, I don't know what they'll do. It's good that they have that the sign at least says Andy's Way, and they are going to be doing some new work at the entry for going down to the beach at Andy's Way. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be some kind of greater acknowledgement of who he was. So that would be good.
Yeah.
Bouncing Bet is in the pink family. That probably doesn't help you much, but
I was just curious.
Deptford
Really?
pink. Yeah, it's in a family that has a lot of times the flowers have like a trumpet shape and then explode out into the petals. So
Okay.
the pink.
Okay. Well, I think with that, if no one else has any questions, where are we going? Where are we going next week, Kim? Let's see.
Next week, we're going to the middle of the island. We're going to be exploring around one end of Old Mill Road, the Dodge Cemetery, and what I think is a beautiful path that connects Old Mill Road with Coonimus Road. So it's going to be a little bit of a circuitous path. It's kind of it's actually a new connecting path. So that was just built this year. So, or mowed out. So we'll be exploring that and explaining that. So I really appreciate everyone's continued participation. Again, they're always available. And if you have questions that you didn't get to, feel free to email me. I'll happily get back to you.
Thanks, Kim.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Thank you for your
Kim.
comments.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Kim. Wonderful tour. Glad you didn't lose your shoe.
I know, right?
I want video of all the times she fell in.
Fortunately, we weren't that advanced. And
So this walk should be at low tide, basically, right?
oh yes, definitely.
Yeah. Look at the tide chart.
And actually, low tide this week is going to be in the mornings. So, but it'll be getting later. Let's see, is that right? Did I just do that? You better check. I think I might have been thinking of last week. Low tide yesterday was at around 6:30 Sunday. So yeah, it's moving an hour forward every day. So take it from there. So, all right. I love that people are sending me pictures of things and asking what they are, and then they get incorporated into the next week's talk. So keep those cards and letters coming. All right. I guess that's it, Charlotte.
Okay. Well, we'll stop.